The world on film is a magical place where our greatest dreams can come alive in the most spectacular of ways. Sometimes, though, it isn't so spectacular. Sometimes we barely even notice that someone added any effects at all. From riding bears to an all-out war, here are 15 visual effects you thought were real. Number 15. 1917. Filming anything in the world of cinema with only one take, no matter how long it may be, is quite the technical feat. When you try to apply this method to a war film, you have quite the task ahead of you. There's so much happening on screen that trying to redo that take can not only be very time-consuming, but also really expensive. I'm talking like blowing stuff up and all of that. It's not very cheap. Much like the German crime film Veronica, which was a film that was one continuous shot for 2 straight hours, 1917's director Sam Mendes and cinematographer Roger Deakins went for the impossible. Filmed this war movie with just one shot. This being the perfect technique for such an intense subject also required a refined eye for what needed to be removed from the screen and what needs to be added in. The effects in the end were extremely subtle. They involved removing cranes in the background, adding puddles and reflections, and for some shots, even reframing. This created some very spectacular and almost unnoticeable changes to the image. The effects team was very involved from the beginning of pre-production and helped form the shot list in the process. The result is one of the most harrowing war experiences in film history. Number 14. The Great Gatsby. Sometimes painting a fantastic world, very grounded in our own, requires a healthy dose of special effects in a film. Director Baz Luhrmann is no stranger to using modern technology to create colorful worlds that are littered with lifelike and compelling characters. Already versed in this technology, Baz went the extra mile for his musical and party-going interpretation of the classic novel The Great Gatsby. Making extensive use of blue and green screen tech, visual effects supervisor Chris Godfrey would be able to create a blown-out and surreal world for Leonardo DiCaprio and the rest of the cast to roam around and party in. Many of the sets and backgrounds were put in as After Effects. While filming on location would have been cool as well, the blue and green screens did allow for much more control than real locations would. The best example is when a part of the cast is seen driving in a car. Well, it seems like they're driving in a car anyways, and this would be a perfectly understandable choice in the end. What we got to experience in theaters was without a doubt a pretty singular experience of fun, lifted even higher by the effects team's hard and inspiring work. Number 13. The Avengers. Wait a minute, there's special effects in the Avengers movie? I thought all those aliens and spaceships were real. All sarcasm aside, the effects team for Avengers Endgame is one of the biggest in film history. This makes sense, considering that Endgame is also one of the biggest films in history of the art form. The team, led by Jen Underdahl, comprised of an army's worth of animators and motion capture technicians. The entire movie is, in reality, almost entirely made up of special effects. Some of the most notable effects done for the film are the facial captures that they had created for the Hulk. Each and every expression on the actor's face, Mark Ruffalo, needed to be captured by technicians and then rendered with animations that were done for each and every little movement. This does sound super time-consuming, not to mention incredibly tedious. In the end game, the results are totally worth it. The team helped to transport us into the marvelous world of all of these characters, and this couldn't have been a reality without the hard work of an army behind all of the beautiful effects. Number 12. Jurassic Park. For a movie that was made almost 20 years ago, the effects have held up very well throughout the years. This is mainly due to the fact that at its time, the film was very, very far ahead of the curve, technologically speaking. When Dennis Muren, the visual effects supervisor, would first be approached to work on the film, he had no idea the impact that it was going to have on the progression of cinema effects. Working with George Lucas's visual effects company, Industrial Light and Magic, really allowed Dennis and his team a lot of space to create what they needed because of the company's cutting-edge equipment. Dennis had always wanted to make something on the same level as the classic sci-fi film 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Lucas had told him that this film could be it for him. After watching the film, it's really easy to see why. The T-Rexes are perfectly rendered and interact with their surrounding environment in a seamless manner. Going between animatronic and computer-generated effects was a stroke of genius, and it really deepened the seamlessness of the experience. There's nothing quite like seeing a guy getting eaten by a T-Rex while taking a poop. Number 11. The Wolf of Wall Street. One of the more subtle entries on our list, this Martin Scorsese film really needed to bend the hyper-specific vision of its director. Scorsese's not only renowned for his films, but also his virtuosity when it comes to how refined and specific that his imagination can be. This requires a gentle and subtle hand to paint such a wide and wonderful portrait that he creates. And for this comedy/drama, the visual effects team was mostly concerned with creating exterior shots. This meant that the actors would shoot some of these exterior scenes in a studio with one part green screen and the other part being a set that was built to fill the space in. This also allowed the effects company Brainstorm Digital to not only refine Scorsese's vision, but also to widen and throw a nice sheen in this hyper-speedy Wall Street film. These scenes were already quite outsized, but with the help of this effects team, they were able to create a true spectacle of something that would otherwise be quite banal. The film is a full-on assault of the senses, and the seamless and subtle effects that this team added is undoubtedly a core part of the super crazy experience that this movie offers. Number 10. Zodiac. Brutal, cold-blooded violence is something of a taboo subject to film in the world of cinema. David Fincher has made a career out of taking the spectator's strange fascination with violence and plunging us into the mind of a killer. To illustrate my point, the film Zodiac works perfectly. The film follows the string of murders in San Francisco throughout the 70s and subjects the viewers to these scenes with horrifying attention to detail. One scene in particular shows us the grisly murder of a cab driver getting shot in the back of the head. The effects company, known as Digital Domains, went into very morbid detail to recreate the ripple effect that happens after a gun is fired at close range. To build the 3D models, the team looked over file after file of forensic evidence to really get a handle on the finer points of shooting someone in the head. Gosh. David Fincher's morbid curiosity with the inner workings of psychopaths is quite well documented, and it certainly comes to life in this film, where he takes us deep into the world of psychopaths and murder. Number 9. A Beautiful Mind. Another surprising entry on the list, A Beautiful Mind by Ron Howard, actually has a scene that really seems completely real, though no one in their right mind would try something like this without the help of special effects. The scene in question, a baby in the bathtub that's slowly filling with water. Put my baby in a movie? Yeah. Put my baby in a movie where it's slowly filling up with water and then film the thing? No. While the two main characters of the film are watching the baby in a tub that starts to fill with water, everything about it seems to be real. But if we look closer, we can see that the water is actually computer generated. The real baby is laying down in a dry tub, and the 3D effects team went into painstaking detail to put light and ripple effects. So this means that no babies were actually harmed in the making of the film. Just film the bathtub twice and you're fine. Once dry with the baby in it, and the other time filling it with water. That's what we call cinema magic. Number 8. Once Upon a Time in Mexico. If I were to say to you, the king of low-budget action films, who would come to your mind first? If you said Robert Rodriguez, you would be 100% correct. Because of his humble budgetary beginnings, Robert had become very familiar with how to use computers to get the shots and effects that he wanted throughout his career. Having a pretty huge interest in comics and other visual storytelling mediums gave him a solid artistic base, so it all seems to have come pretty naturally. Not everything is computers with Rodriguez, however. In the movie Once Upon a Time in Mexico, he used gas canisters to help Selma Hayek's character to be able to throw her knives with laser-like precision. He clearly has a way with those practical effects. But then in his next film, Sin City, he went all in on the CGI. This film was his opposite. Much more focused on visual effects on the set, painted our screens with explosions and massive gunfights. All the things that you would come to expect when you watch a Robert Rodriguez film. Number 7. The Social Network. How cool would it be to have a computer-generated twin? Well, for The Social Network, Fincher took a step back from killing people and focusing on psychopaths. Oh wait, this one is about Mark Zuckerberg. And he dove into the lonely world of online friendships and the real-world distances that such apps put on our close ones and us. The Winklevoss twins in the movie were played by Armie Hammer. Just him alone. The other actor had Armie's face digitally imposed on top of his. I'm not sure if I really feel bad for the guy or if that's totally awesome. In any case, Fincher used this technique and a plethora of others for the Royal Regatta sequence. Composed of 57 shots, each of them containing some kind of computer alteration, this sequence features 3D tracking to replace the backgrounds and depth maps to simulate tilt-shift photography. When properly implemented, this can give a viewer a sense of isolation and distance from the world in the film and the characters on the screen. Fincher may not be making Avengers films, but he sure does know how to use CGI to the fullest of its potential, whether he's swapping faces or killing cab drivers. Number 6. Forrest Gump. In 1994, the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects went to Forrest Gump. But how could this be, you may be asking yourself? Well, if you think about it, Forrest went through many scenes in history, and they seemed completely plausible when watching the movie. The man who achieved this level of seamlessness? Ken Ralston, who also did movies like Return of the Jedi and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The guy is really good. To show a perfect example of his prowess in the film, you look at a scene when Forrest meets John F. Kennedy, and you see it happen on TV. He shakes the president's hand and then runs off to go pee. He has expertly used a manipulated blue screen to put Forrest not only right in front of the president, but in front of him and on a television set. Throw in everything else that Forrest does, like becoming a ping pong champion, Lieutenant Dan losing his legs, and everything else, it's understandable why this won the Academy Award that year. Number 5. Brokeback Mountain. What could be the most absolutely boring thing that you could make with special effects? Oh, clouds, perhaps? Wait, that's exactly what they did in Brokeback Mountain. Now, I'm being sarcastic, of course. This is very fine work that really does help add to the general tone and feel of the film. Along with creating and enhancing the sky in the film, the team behind the effects, Buzz Image Group, created 75 other shots, which included ones where they had to fill out a herd of sheep that was on the screen.
Hell, that's the most I've spoken in a year.
This is understandable. It wouldn't be so epic for a couple of cowboys to be herding like 2 sheep, now would it? One of the more complicated additions involved the team creating a hailstorm. The end result is like a fine painting of a landscape, large, full of color, and overtones of melancholy. This is definitely thanks to the almost unrecognizable work of the effects team. It's the sad truth for most people who work in post-production. The less that they notice you for your work, the better you are at it. Number 4. Maleficent. On to the more obvious side of special effects, makeup, and costumes. They're all a total art within themselves. And for the film Maleficent, costume designer Ellen Mirojenik and special effects makeup designer David White would go all in to try and recreate the world of Snow White, coming away with a singular vision of a story that's been well worn out throughout the years. Using prosthetics and an intricate costume design, the teams were able to push the actors even further into their embodiments of the characters. Even though the film is set in a fantastical world, their use of modern technology and the actors pushing themselves rendered their work totally believable and awe-inspiring. David White, who was nominated for his work in Guardians of the Galaxy, pulled out all the stops for this Disney reinvention. He wanted a darker tone, and he most definitely got it, pulling inspiration from the woods and other natural elements appearing in the movie. The prosthetics were handmade and form-fitted to each of the actors' faces perfectly. The process took a long time to prepare each day of shooting, so dedication and a fine attention to detail became incredibly necessary. Number 3. Terminator 2. Without a doubt, one of the most important action films ever made, and certainly in my top 5, is Terminator 2. Now, in a lot of cases, sequels are terrible, but Terminator 2 really blew its predecessor out of the water by upping the ante in the special effects department. While the first one got people's attention with practical effects and an on-point Schwarzenegger, the second one fully utilized the burgeoning techniques of computer-generated effects. Who doesn't love the Liquid T-1000? Even though CGI was still coming into its own at the time, director James Cameron had a very specific vision, and he had the knowledge to push the technology that he had in the moment to achieve what he wanted. So how did they get all of those Terminators on screen during the battle scenes? Well, they used some miniatures to film the scenes and a rotoscoping technique to get the pew-pew lasers to fly past as well. The Terminators that were in the foreground, those were full-sized. There is a before and after Terminator 2 when talking about special effects, and this film set the bar really high for decades to come. Not only in terms of how they did it, but how James used film techniques to render them to be even more lifelike. Number 2. The Jungle Book. The difficulty that was behind the effects of the Jungle Book's live-action remake involved a real-life actor having to interact with animals that were not actually there. Not only are the interactions difficult, but the team at MPC and Weta Digital had to fill the screen with an entire jungle's worth of animals. In order to really get these interactions as lifelike as possible, the teams used motion capture, then animated them in accordance with what the actor had done on the day of shooting. Along with these already incredibly difficult animations, the team then created an astonishing 224 different CGI animals in the background, all of which required a ton of study concerning their movements and general physical behaviors. Even the environment in the film would be created using computers. I mean, how the heck are you supposed to film this stuff without it anyways? The maestro behind these special effects was Rob Legato. He's the go-to guy for James Cameron and Martin Scorsese, so I think it goes without saying that he definitely has the chops for something as complex as a young boy who's messing around in the jungle. Number 1. The Walk. Let's put a baby in a tub filling with water. No, wait, I have a better idea. Let's suspend our actor on a wire between the Twin Towers and have him try to walk across it. I don't think so. The Robert Zemeckis film, The Walk, required something like this, but instead of actually doing it, they opted to have Joseph Gordon-Levitt on a wire, but in a studio with a healthy amount of special effects. Because the entire film revolves around him and this walk across the towers, No expense would be spared in the effects department in order to render this sequence as realistic as possible. Even though it was reproduced with CGI, Joseph had to undergo wire walking training. Then they recreated the tops of the Twin Towers in a studio and used green screens to generate the bustling city below. The traffic itself was even hand animated. This basically means that it was much more of a painstaking process, but gave a much more nuanced result. The visual effects supervisor Kevin Bally thought that it would give more depth and character to the 1970s New York. And boy, was he not wrong. Sometimes seeing is believing, and other times, well, you just gotta kinda question if it really went down like that.